You're listening to Systemic Era Podcast. The failure was designed.
Trump just proved how easily the system can be weaponized, based on an article by Robert Reich. Trump is the product, the system is the crime scene, the source. Briefly, Robert Reich argues that Trump's damage is not just personal corruption but proof that American institutions are easy to capture. His answer is a structural reform agenda, term limits for Supreme Court justices, real conflict of interest rules, limits on presidential control of prosecutions, anti-gerrymandering measures, revived voting rights, restrictions on media concentration, protection for universities, public financing, a wealth tax, and abolition of the Electoral College. The wrong center of gravity. The column starts from the right place. Trump is not a random accident, and his conduct is not self-contained. He did not create the conditions that let him loot, retaliate, and govern through grievance. He exploited a system built to be gamed by the rich, the authoritarian-minded, and the shameless. But the story gets sharper when you stop treating Trump as the main event. Trump is the face on the product packaging. The real power lives in the institutions that kept working for him, the Republican caucus that enabled him, and the legal architecture that let him turn the presidency into a personal instrument. The damage is not merely that he is vile. The damage is that the system keeps finding ways to absorb vileness and call it governance. Who had power? The institutional power in the story sits where it usually sits, with the executive branch when seized by a president willing to abuse it, with the courts when they are insulated from democratic correction, with congressional maps drawn to protect incumbents, and with a media and money system that rewards domination over legitimacy. Reich's list is strongest when it names those choke points directly. It is not an argument about manners. It is an argument about levers. The president's influence over prosecutions, the absence of robust ethics rules, the Electoral College, gerrymanders, dark money, and concentrated media ownership are not abstract flaws. They are power-conserving devices. They were designed or tolerated to keep accountability weak and elite safe. The column is right, but still too gentle. Reich blames Republican cowards and sycophants, which is accurate as far as it goes. The GOP built a permission structure for authoritarian politics and then stood aside while Trump filled it with greed, cruelty, and legal vandalism. That is not a misunderstanding. It is complicity. Still, the framing remains polite in one important way. It treats the problem as a collapse of norms that can be corrected by better rules. Rules matter. Some of these reforms are indispensable, but the deeper pattern is that American institutions are not merely under strain. They are often organized to dilute democratic power until a determined minority can rule through courts, money, and procedural sabotage. If a system repeatedly produces Trump-shaped outcomes, then abuse is not the exception. It is the test the system keeps failing. What the reform list gets right. The reform agenda is strongest when it targets structural choke points instead of sentimental nostalgia. Term limits for justices, real limits on conflicts of interest, barring presidents from meddling in prosecutions, independent redistricting, restored voting rights, public financing, wealth taxation, ending the Electoral College. These are not technocratic trims round the edges. They are attempts to make democracy function against organized minority rule. That is the correct direction. A democracy that lets wealth buy office, courts outlive elections, and presidents weaponize justice is not merely inefficient. It is pre-authorized for sabotage. The weakness is that the list reads like a repair manual for a machine that should have been designed differently in the first place. It is a competent answer to one presidency and to a broader class of failures, but it still assumes the republic can be fixed by better guardrails alone. Sometimes the guardrails are the only things standing between civic life and open capture. Sometimes they are also a confession of how much damage the original design already permits. The bigger pattern. The pattern here is familiar: elite impunity, democratic erosion, and public harm packaged as institutional normalcy. Trump makes it ugly enough that people notice. The ugliness is useful because it reveals what the polished version hides. The same structures that let a corrupt demagogue thrive also protect wealth, entrench minority rule, and turn accountability into a partisan hobby. That is why this cannot be reduced to Trump's personality, and it cannot be solved by waiting for the next decent person to occupy the Oval Office. The task is to break the pipelines that convert money into power, power into impunity, and impunity into policy. The reforms Reich lists point in that direction. They should be treated as baseline democratic defense, not as an ambitious wish list. You've been listening to Systemic Error. Thanks to Alternet for today's article, with the automated voice of Kristen. Thanks for listening.